My mother believed in signs. Not in a superstitious way. She wasn't reading horoscopes or throwing salt over her shoulder. She meant it more quietly than that. She believed that if you paid attention, the world would show you what you needed to see. That the truth had a way of surfacing, eventually, if you stayed still enough to notice it. She told me that on a Sunday afternoon when I was 17, sitting on the back porch, watching the light change over the yard she'd spent 15 years making beautiful. She died 8 months later. And the truth she always believed in surfaced at her graveside 2 years after that, in the form of a woman I'd never met, holding flowers I didn't recognize, with a 4-year-old boy on her hip who had my stepfather's eyes. I stood 20 feet away and understood everything in about 10 seconds. Then I went home, opened my laptop, and started the work that would take me 18 months to complete and cost my stepfather everything he thought he'd gotten away with. My mother was right about signs. She just didn't live long enough to see this one. Let me tell you about Ellen first, because she deserves more than to be the backstory to someone else's crime. She was a librarian for 22 years. She had a laugh that started in her shoulders and a memory for names that made everyone she met feel like they mattered. She grew tomatoes every summer with complete commitment and wildly inconsistent results, and she'd give away whatever came in. Bags of them left on neighbors' porches with no note because she didn't need credit for kindness. She married my father when I was 2. He died when I was 9. After that, it was just us for 6 years, which were hard years money-wise, but the kind of hard that makes you feel held rather than alone. She worked extra shifts. She packed my lunches. She came to every cross-country meet, even the ones that started at 7 a.m. in the rain. She met Frank Dello when I was 15 through a church group he'd recently joined. He was attentive and easygoing and seemed, in retrospect, to have an extraordinary talent for being exactly what a person needed him to be long enough to close the deal. They dated for a year. They married quietly, small ceremony, backyard, family only. I was not against it. I want to be clear about that. I was 17 and cautiously hopeful. My mother was happy in a specific new way, lighter somehow, and I was old enough to understand that she deserved that. What Frank had, that I didn't see then, was patience, the long game kind, the kind that looks like devotion from close up. My mother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in October of my senior year of high school. By April, she was gone. 6 months from diagnosis to burial, which the doctors told us was actually longer than most, and which we tried to be grateful for, and mostly were. 6 months is enough time to say what needs saying. We said it. I'm thankful for that. Frank was present through all of it, attentive, organized, handling the logistics of medical care and insurance and appointments with an efficiency that I was too exhausted and grieving to question. He managed everything. He was the one who found the life insurance policy, a policy my mother had maintained for 15 years, purchased when my biological father died, with me named as the sole beneficiary. At least, that's what I thought. What I found out 18 months later was that Frank had had that beneficiary designation changed 4 months before my mother died. Changed to himself. Changed during a period when she was on significant pain medication and could not always reliably track paperwork. The policy paid out $280,000. I received nothing. Here's what I knew at the time. That my mother had a life insurance policy, that I was supposed to be the beneficiary, that when I asked Frank about it 3 weeks after the funeral, in the fog of grief and practicality that follows a death, he told me the policy had lapsed, that there was nothing. I believed him. I was 18. I was heartbroken. I had no reason to disbelieve him, and I had no resources to investigate, and grief does something to your ability to scrutinize. It narrows your field of vision to what's directly in front of you, which was just trying to get through each day. I left for college that fall on a combination of scholarships and student loans. Frank stayed in my mother's house. I came back for holidays the first year, less the second. By the third year, I wasn't coming back at all, and I told myself it was because the house felt like a ghost of her, which was true. The other truth, the one I wasn't less honest with myself about, was that something about Frank had always sat wrong, a frequency I couldn't name. He was never unkind. He never did anything I could point to. He just had that quality of a room that looks clean, but smells faintly of something you can't place. I ignored it. I was young, and I was grieving, and I had a life to build. And then I went to visit her grave on the second anniversary of her death on a Tuesday in April, and there was a woman there that wasn't me. She was maybe 35, dark hair, sensible coat, the look of someone who had gotten dressed with purpose. The boy beside her was small, 4 maybe, or young 5, and he was holding a single stem flower with the focused concentration of a child who had been told this was important. I slowed without meaning to. The woman looked up. She saw my face, and something happened in her expression that told me she recognized me, not from having met me, but from having seen a photograph. She knew who I was before I knew anything about her. She said, "You're Ellen's daughter." It was not a question. "Yes," I said. She looked at me for a long moment, then she looked at the boy, then back at me, like she was making a decision in real time. She said, "I think that you and I probably should talk," she said carefully. Her name was Donna. She'd met Frank 6 years ago, a year into his marriage to my mother, at a work event. She didn't know he was married, not at first. By the time she found out, she was pregnant, and Frank had told her a story about a marriage that was essentially over. He'd promised he was handling it. He kept her and her son, whose name was Tyler, in an apartment 40 minutes away from the house where my mother was planting tomatoes and working extra shifts and trusting her husband. Donna had spent years operating on Frank's timeline, believing in a version of events he controlled. When my mother died, he'd told Donna it would just take a little time before things could be official. That had been 2 years ago. She said, "He told me about the insurance money. We were sitting in her car in the cemetery parking lot. Tyler was asleep in the back seat. He told me he was using it to settle Ellen's affairs, medical debt, estate costs." She paused. I never saw a dollar of it. I stopped asking because when I asked, things got bad. I looked at her for a long time. I asked her one more question. "Do you still have any documents? Anything he sent you? Any records? Anything at all?" She opened her glove compartment. She had a folder. I want to tell you about the 18 months that followed because I think it's important to be honest. They were not cinematic. They were not a montage of decisive actions set to swelling music. They were slow and expensive and bureaucratic, and there were weeks when I genuinely didn't know if I was going to get anywhere. I got a lawyer first, a woman named Carolyn Brooks who specialized in insurance fraud and estate disputes, and who, when I laid out the full picture in our first meeting, said 2 things. First, this is prosecutable. Second, this is going to take a while. Are you prepared for that? I told her I'd been waiting 2 years without knowing I was waiting. A little longer was fine. Carolyn filed a complaint with the state insurance commissioner, which triggered an investigation into the beneficiary change. The investigation found what I already knew. The paperwork had been processed during a window when my mother's cognitive function was documented in her medical records. The signature on the change of beneficiary form, when examined by a forensic document analyst, showed inconsistencies with my mother's signatures from the same period. Put simply, it didn't hold up.
While that investigation was running, a separate complaint filed with the State Attorney General's office, supported by Donna's documents, the timeline, and Frank's own inconsistent financial records, opened a parallel track around fraud and elder financial abuse. Frank hired a lawyer. His lawyer sent me a letter describing my actions as harassment and suggesting I was motivated by greed and resentment towards a grieving widower. I sent that letter to Carolyn, who added it to the file. Frank called me 7 months in. I'd been expecting it. People like Frank call when they feel the walls closing in and think that charm can still do what documentation can't. "Sweetheart," he said, and the fact that he led with that word, with that particular warm familiarity, told me exactly how worried he was. "Hi, Frank. I want to stop you there." A pause. "The insurance commissioner's investigation is complete. The beneficiary change has been invalidated